Welcome to another episode of Socratic Satsang. Our topic for discussion this time is relationships in today's world. What does it take to construct and sustain a relationship in this age of digital distractions, or rapid change, and the blurred lines? Lines are getting more and more blurred every day. It's a far cry from how it was 40 or maybe 50 years ago. New rules being changed almost every single day. In this malleable and changing situation, how do we build trust? How do we relate? And what does intimacy look like today is our things we're hoping to explore. So over to our first speaker, Paulina. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So, I gave it a bit of a thought, and there's a lot of talk about communication today being very different and relationships being different because of technology. So, I don't want to touch too much into that because I think we are all pretty aware that we are not able to see each other as much, and we have a lot of uh, distractions, and life has changed. So my thought is more about connection, and I'd like to mention an experiment that was done in the 50s and 60s by Henry Harlow, and I'm sure most of you are very familiar. Is the monkeys, the rhesus monkeys, where they were given two mothers. One mother was made of wire, and the other one was made of a stuffed toy. And the mother that was made of wire was feeding milk, and the other one was only giving comfort. So to me, connections are about uh, emotional fulfillment. And so when I see technology is wonderful because it helps us being connected and informed, but I'm not sure that I can find that emotional connection to the degree that I can see face to face. So to me, today, there's a lot of challenge, especially young people. I find they don't interact the way we learned to interact 30 years ago. We basically didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that. We just basically call each other and arrange to meet at a place, and everything was face to face. There was a lot of touching and body language and things that made us feel belonging and fulfill our emotional needs in a different way that only through body language we can do. Now, I'm not saying that there is no value in the communication and the connections that we have online and through internet and the new ways. Of course, it has opened a lot of venues and a lot of things that we never had. But I believe that um, we go to, let's say, if there's 10 levels of um, connection. With technology, we only reach about half or a little bit more than half. And so that has created a lot of need for people to uh, continually seek more connections and more attention. Now, attention is also another way that even as when we are very young people, we crave attention from people. Look, I learned to ride a bike, or look, I'm doing this. This is an inner need that we all have because it validates who we are, it teaches us who we are. But what has happened is because we don't have a lot of emotional connections with friends, like, face to face, there's a lot of, I'm going to say, confusion and almost even deviance into what people relate as. So we are trying to get attention from others, or I shouldn't say you, but not everybody. But you can see that through internet and Facebook. Uh, and so I also find there's other aspects about different cultures. We connect differently, and if you go to cultures where there's not a lot of technology and there's more emphasis on social aspects and social community, you find connections are of a different type. And so that's my thought. I think while technology has increased our chances to communicate and pass information and maybe meet people that otherwise we would never, I'm not sure it can completely replace what we crave emotionally from a connection. And it can just be as an introductory point. And that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
Sure. Well, that's perfect. I guess one of the roles I often will play is as the sort of digital um, enthusiast or advocate. So I thought about this questions and specifically certain aspects of where technology actually seems to bring something novel, like something beneficial. Certainly, we will get to, no doubt, some of the challenges, the stresses and distractions and whatnot. Um, but I want to um, first. I followed up and I checked in on one of the earlier podcasts on the nature of consciousness, and of course, drew a direct connection to relationships. And had I been on that one, I would have chimed in about consciousness being a form of story, basically a running story in which we are the one of the actors, the actor. And it operates on many levels, and several of those levels are, we'll call it, linguistic or enabled by language, and they are necessarily social. They are something that are constructed through interaction. So to Paulina's point, the social interactions that we will experience face to face, you get immediate feedback, whether you're going too far this way, and there's all sorts of levels. I ran into one of my restaurateur friends here in the village, and I was telling him about it, and out of the blue, he just put his arm on my shoulder as to sort of, congratulate me about something, and that's a physical endorsement that you suddenly remember, like, I remember distinctly now. Um, so in thinking that way, I was talking just two short stories. Now I'll stop and then I'll come back with more stories. I'm always telling stories. Uh, One is a niece of mine who met her husband playing World of Warcraft, so online gaming. And this is more than 20 years ago. So it was actually, it was big, but it wasn't, the online world wasn't as prominent. And I met this guy from Colorado, Brian, delightful, and they are the perfect match. One of these ones where they're not the same, they're actually perfect opposites. They balance each other sublimely well. Uh, And so while they were going through the immigration, they actually felt kind of bashful, saying, "Well, we met online." And even then, even in sort of the mid-20s, um, the immigration officer said, "Nowadays, it's not weird. People are almost everybody showing up here has met in some way online." And because they were doing something that they both were interested in, and sort of found a resonance on a certain level that led to eventually them meeting, and they're still happily married. So it's sort of a interesting. And then the second story is not dissimilar in that I was in an online conference about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and there was one participant with actually a doctorate in language and intercultural communication, of all things, from Vienna. And we really hit it off, and we started then, being digital buddies, going back and forth, and then I happened to be going to Vienna on business, so we arranged to meet near the Steppendom big, church in Vienna, and forgetting myself entirely, not remembering that I was a stranger from faraway Canada, very suspect. I just grabbed her and gave her a big hug because I, in a certain level, felt that I knew her intrinsically, and then I realized I've gone too far. It's really good. It's like, but it was an interesting example where at certain levels of connection, we really were, had built quite a strong relationship. And I've been back several times to sort of collaborate with her on projects and we're still buddies. So in some ways, a couple of years of digital acquaintance allowed us to create a level of connection which may have a lot to do with the language that we use and the way we talk about things and so on. So those are just two little vignettes, and people can shoot them down or reuse them as desired.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Oh, I guess I can go.
Denise, followed by Leon.
Okay. Hi, everyone. When I saw this topic, I had to leave the last podcast a little early last time. So I was like, oh, relationships. Interesting topic. When I think about it today, in today's terms, and I don't want to date myself, but certainly things have changed quite a bit. I completely agree with what Paulina said around technology. We're supposedly more connected more than ever, but more people actually feel quite alone, even with all of these tools of the dating apps and the texting and the social media. But I find they tend to leave out things like presence, vulnerability, and time. Um, when I think about this, trust to me is a key cornerstone in building relationships. All those shared moments of consistency and emotional safety that come up. And of course, our own evolution and growth over time shapes our definition of what relationships are as well, right? So when I got married at 25, my idea of being in love was very different than it is now based on my experience. And actually, another thing Paulina had mentioned about cultural differences, I find when I do a lot of traveling, and when I travel, I notice in different cultures, in different areas of the world, there's different, and I think Joe touched on it as well. There's just different ways of forming those relationships through whether it's touch, whether it's hugging, whether like whatever it might be. I just find that some people in some areas, whether it's culturally or a country, whatever it might be, outside of Vancouver. I love Vancouver. It's a lovely city. Grew up here, but I can really see, even if I go to Victoria or to Souk, you can see a little bit of a shift in that from like a big city, so to speak, into a smaller area, and how people can relate to other people. I also find, and of course, being in the metaphysical, having that background, there's, the energy that it takes to meet someone, to be open, to put yourself out there, and that's just the beginning. And once you've met someone, then there's this question of how does that relationship fit in to a life that already feels full and already exists. And I find, certainly for me as I get older, what I've worked hard to build to feel kind of a little bit more of that solid, grounded foundation. Um, it's always obvious where someone fits in, whether it's a friendship or a relationship, a love relationship. And I'll just end off. I like reading about what Aristotle has to say. I really enjoy just kind of pulling at some of the things that he shared, um, and so he believed that deep friendship, so philia, was the term in ancient Greek, was essential to a good life. And it's the kind of bond that's built on shared values, mutual respect, and a desire for another's growth. So while he framed it around friendship, that same foundation to me is what really allows romantic relationships to truly last. So it's not necessarily just all about attraction or companionship. It's that deep caring that we have for the other person's well being and choosing each other with intention. And so, the questions that come to mind after thinking about this is, are people truly willing to invest time and energy into connecting? And moreover, does that change with age? And then how open are we to letting someone into our lives without kind of losing what we've already built, and including any kind of protection mechanisms that we've put in place for ourselves, thanks to like past hurt or past experience. So just some of the things that kind of come up when I think about this.
Thank you, Denise. Over to you, Leon.
For sure. So I really like what we've been pretty much going over in terms of connection in our modern day world. And it's kind of like pretty ironic in the sense that we have computers, we have the internet, smartphones, everything like that. So the world is more interconnected per se, but we find that there's a lot of loneliness going on in the modern world because Gen Z or the millennials grew up into that technological age per se. And I can't really quote the number off the top of my head, but I do remember that Gen Z was probably the loneliest generation so far on record. Gen Alpha is still coming up. And it's pretty ironic given that we're the ones who grew up into that interconnected world per se. So when it comes to like relationships, oftentimes people tend to jump to like a boyfriend or girlfriend or husband and wife. Because I remember when I told one person that I'll be talking on this kind of topic with a group of people, and the first thing he said was, "Oh, like, is it dating advice and so on and so forth." So it's interesting that in the modern day world we tend to really focus on that. Which, don't get me wrong, like that is very important in that regard because, of course, like who doesn't like that romantic love or that connection? But the thing is that we often can forget that relationship means relationship. So there's a relationship with coworkers, relationship with your brother's siblings, spouse, or relationship with yourself. And the thing is that if it's a relationship, then there has to be something connecting between like different people. And it's basically the mechanism behind that connection is pretty much love. That's pretty much that mechanism that connects. So in the mechanism of love, you have the lover and you have the beloved, and then what's connecting between the lover and the beloved is pretty much love. And what I really love that the ancient Greeks did was that they actually make a very clear distinction with the different types of love. I think Denise also touched on that too. So, for example, like the kind of love that a man has for a woman or that a woman has for a man, you can't really use that to describe the love that you have for a slice of pizza, for example. You need to be able to appropriately um define what type of connection goes on with different people. So a common definition was that philia was the love that friends have with one another, connected with similar values, so on and so forth. In today's society is the romantic ones. Then you have storge, which is love between family members, and then you have agape, which is basically a self-sacrificing love. You're willing to give of yourself for the good of the other person in that regard. And the thing is that from what I've been observing, and I'm going to connect this back to Jonathan Haidt's research. If I'm not sure if the panelists are familiar with his work, but when Haidt actually was looking at the reasons for the high anxiety levels in like Gen Alpha and Gen Z, it actually came out in his recent book, The Anxious Generation. He was showing that one of the key reasons, there's other reasons of course, but a major reason behind this rise in anxiety levels in the younger generations is because with the advent of technologies, especially addictive technologies, children ended up playing less. In other words, when you look back at our childhoods, thankfully I grew up back in Jamaica, where my family, they were into technology but not too heavily, thankfully. There was a lot of collaboration, I remember, working with other people, and from that collaboration there was that connection, and it was still like playing, like even something simpler as oh, I'm the fireman, like you're the policeman, so on and so forth. So Haidt was actually showing that with the advent of technologies, there was actually a lot less play that the different kids got to do, and because of that, they never they had a missed opportunity to learn to connect with other people. And when I look back at it, like, what do you do as human beings? You tend to collaborate in one way, shape, or form. And through that collaboration, that's when you learn to connect and to love one another in that sense. Because, like, my friend, for example, last week collaborated with me to help me move to a new spot. So something simple like that. I collaborate with my coworkers. A husband and a wife, or a boyfriend and a girlfriend, has to collaborate with one another to do something else. Or as another relationship would be like siblings collaborating with each other in a family, in the home, in that sense. So I think, to touch on what we've been talking about, the technologies, they help to connect us a lot, but because everything is more at home, virtual, we tend to miss out on some aspects of collaboration. Because, of course, we're in a Zoom meeting here, we're collaborating in this moment. But I guess one interesting thing that we can probably talk about is, maybe with all this modern tech, what's a way that we can better learn to collaborate with one another in that way? Because we have a lot of tools in today's world, right? But let's say if I have a hammer, right, and I use it to build something, right? But if I take it and whack someone's head, then that's doing something bad. So that could be also like another way that we could explore this topic, is how can we like better like utilize like things like smartphones and laptops and computers to actually build connection, better sense.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Okay, Drake, and after that, me, and then back to Paulina.
So when I thought about this topic about relationships and how they, I thought maybe looking back at the past relationships and going forward and doing a bit of comparison and thinking about way back historically in the past, where we were living in small communities, tribes. Um, it was very much, you had a relationship with everybody around you, and there was um, direct personal relationships all the time. As we moved, built cities and that, those relationships changed. You didn't have the same close relationships with as many people. You had more relationships overall because of the number of people you're exposed to. But many of those relationships were of a very different kind than they had been earlier. There's still some close personal relationships, but there's far more relationships overall, whether they're positive or negative. And then eventually we get the ability to not just be in our cities, but easily travel and easily communicate beyond our own little city and that. And once again, with the advent of telephones and easy traveling, that opened up a whole bunch of new relationships. And the telephone changed the way we talk to somebody that we might want a relationship with. We can still have that relationship even if they're not close. However, it's not the same as the direct personal relationship, but it could keep relationships going on, where in the past, if somebody moved away, they were gone. And maybe you would see them occasionally if you went on a trip or they came back. But a lot of those relationships changed forever that way. Nowadays, with the internet and all the access we have to the different forms of social media communication, we have thousands of friends online. And many of those people we have some level of relationship with. But for the vast majority of them, it's a much more superficial relationship than um, those with the closest to us, right? And if you look at it, the people in the past probably had more close relationships than we do today, just because we spread our time and our energy amongst so many. Um, so that's where I sort of think we are today. With the advent of things like AI, there's already AI bots and that can fool people into believing they're real. And people are going to start having relationships with artificial intelligences, some of them knowingly, others not knowingly. But some may be happy to live in their virtual reality, um, and lose the ability to have good relationships in reality. Um, I don't mean to be negative and scary. I'm just seeing this as a possibility, just as any other technology can go awry where you didn't see it initially. Um, I think our relationships have been ever evolving from the first two people up until today. Just the pace they've changed, with the advent of the internet, really around that age when it started, has increased exponentially, and it's got that potential to continue. And at some point, it's going to be harder and harder for people to keep up in a positive way. Um, so there'll be a lot more challenges, and we're definitely living in very interesting times. I'll let someone else carry on.
Thank you. Charles Darwin introduced us to the concept of survival of the fittest. It's been tested through time. Very few people argue with it. It's just held true for centuries. I'd like to introduce the topic of survival of the friendliest. There's 3 species that can prove this theory. Penguins. Penguins survive harsh winters by huddling together. Friendliness counts. Wolves turned into dogs, and dogs are so friendly that they're now integrated into our lives and they proliferate more than most other species. The third species is human beings. I learned in school as a young kid that human beings are social animals. We need others, we need relationships for self validation, for connection, to learn, to avoid making mistakes, to just go faster in life, to go better in life, and to go deeper in life. In today's world, as we mentioned before, this world of digital distractions and instant availability of almost any and everything, we mostly don't even have relationships with our grocers. Like, otherwise, when I was a kid, the shop from where I used to buy my grocery, I had a relationship with the sales guy there. He knew me, he knew my dad, he knew my mom. There were relationships there. Now most of the shopping is done online. If we talk about what really influences relationships today, besides the digital world, or let's just go into that first, since everything is available with a single swipe or a click, it has influenced our level of patience, our level of tolerance, and how much are we willing to invest when there's a gap between you and the other person. Most of us just say, okay, this person's not worth following up with. That's just the reality of today. I don't think it's bad or good. It's just how we are today. The other huge influence on relationships today, I can attest to this myself being an immigrant, is globalization. Culture, where you've been brought up, makes a huge, huge difference. Um, Living in Canada, eye contact is a big issue. Certain cultures value eye contact. You look into the eyes of the person near you, even if you're in a metro, in a train, and a bus. In Canada, we don't look at people in the eyes because it's just offensive. It just invades their privacy. Now, there's no saying who's right or wrong. It's just different cultures. And we need to be able to find some kind of a medium in between. These are huge influences on building relationships. Just definitions of relationships, definitions of roles can be influenced by cultures and where we come from. today's relationships are fairly different from how a relationship was invested in, how it was constructed, and how it was sustained maybe just 40 years ago. Today, the whole system is different, and one needs to be able to adapt. One needs to be able to find ways to still create intimacy, to be able to come to common priorities, to be able to come somewhere in between, because no matter how digital or how global things get, relationships are vital. And we need to be able to put in the work to find out and to figure out how to make them work. Those are just my thoughts on it for now. I'll hand over to Paulina.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm just relaying to something that I thought when Liam was talking about gens having a very hard time socializing. So I don't think it's just gens. I think it's affecting everybody, except they were not born previous to these times, so they didn't acquire these skills. So in relationship to that, I think one of the pieces that nobody, or very few people, I should say, is not nobody, is talking about is your nervous system. So we are sensory bombarded by a lot of things. And I understand that because I have an autistic daughter. I also have another daughter who's Asperger's high functioning, but they both get affected by the same. I get affected by the same. And it is the fact that I'm just going to put something that happens to most autistic people. And it is, if you can imagine your nervous system as a place where there's a lot of gates. Information comes in from the outside, you process it, and through another gate, information comes out, your response. To have social interactions, you need to have a lot of attention. There's smells, there's body language, there's tone of voice, there's movement, there's words that come out. You need to process that with your mind and your verbal ability. And there's also a lot of background that we also have. Because when we listen, we basically only listen to half of what's being said. The other, we construct in our mind. And sometimes when we talk, we also talk 50% of what we need to say because we kind of assume that the other person knows. So in order to process all of that, we need this very efficient machine that in most times functions fantastic, which is your nervous system, your brain. It helps you process all of that. So today's world, and this is looked at from like my daughter who has this issue, most autistic people cannot relate properly because the nervous system has um, these parts that are modulated differently. So a noise would be so loud and so distracting that you're no longer able to pay attention to somebody else talking or to the tone of voice or whatever. So for for the rest of us who don't have that same issue, we have a similar condition because we have phones, we have TV, we have appointments, we have a life that is so busy and so unnatural. This is not the way we evolved. So a lot of the loneliness that we are experiencing actually comes from the fact that our life has changed. This is not the same as what we had 30 years ago. And I find, so one of the things that some of you have heard this story, when I first moved into Canada, this is 35 years ago, I came from Ecuador, very friendly. Everybody's like, whatever. So you move, and within 3 days, your neighbors come, they give you food, and they say hello, blah, blah. You have no problem making friends. So I came to Canada, and we moved into this apartment building with 30 units. And after the third day, nobody had come. And I was like, okay, what happened? So I decided I'm going to invite every person in the building and just make a nice party downstairs and get to see everybody because I just came from a different place where this is normal. But to my surprise and to my ex-husband's surprise was that nobody came, because the life that people have in Canada, your nervous system, which is connecting back to that, you're already more busy. People become individualistic because there's I don't know, there's a job, there's a career you have to pursue, there's this title, there's this neighborhood that you have to live, there's this garden that you have to keep this way. There's so many little things eating up at your attention that people become a little enclosed. And so that makes you a little bit less available to get to know other people, even if the people live close to you. And when you don't know people close to you, you become a little fearful. And so when people are individualistic, I find beneath that, there's a little bit of fear. So back to my story of having invited people in my apartment and nobody showing up. 3 years later, I finally made friends with my neighbor that she had a kid my kid's age. And she explained to me that most people thought I was about to sell them something. And so they didn't want me to do that. So anyway, so that's basically my experience that I had. And I just find a little bit of sadness in the fact that we judge the fact that we are not connecting and that times are better and we need to acquire better tools. But we need to have a little bit more understanding. It is our nervous system that is being bombarded. And in order to connect to others, we need to free up our space. Just like my daughter who's autistic, if I want her to listen and to pay attention, I have to create an environment where her nervous system can connect to me and to others and to whatever she's doing. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Over to you, Kevin, followed by Tulip.
Okay, getting back to your grocer story, Vin. I had to bring my wife into this. We moved to Souk from Ottawa 2.5 years ago. And for Karen, it was a lonely time. I make friends a little bit easier than Karen does. But anyway, she once she got the house set up, I was said, all right, if you want to get a job, we don't need the money, but if you want to, just for the social interaction, go for it. So she interviewed for at one of our two grocery stores in town. And Suka's at the time was around 15,000 people. And for Karen, it was like interaction overload, because she would see people day after day or week after week, and she had these special new glasses that made her stand out and say, oh, you're the girl with the glasses. And so everywhere we would go in town, and we're registering at a new dentist, and the receptionist says, where do I know you from? The glasses, right? It's I'm a cashier at the grocery store. Ah, that's where. So Karen now, after 2 years, is thinking of, all right, we're at an age now where we want to do a little bit more things, but she's reluctant to give up the job. I mean, they've reduced, she voluntarily reduced her hours to one shift a week in the store. And our financial advisor says you don't have to work, you can quit, but she's reluctant to because of the interaction. She's known in town. She's recognized by the mayor. It's quite fun. And for myself, yeah, Karen describes the grocery store as the water cooler of Souk, and that people gather there and you get all sorts of information what's going on in Souk. And I'd be reluctant to, okay, Karen, how was your day? And then be, oh, really? And then I would find out a lot of information that way. And the 10% discount it doesn't hurt either on groceries. So I know that I'll be sad when she eventually does give it up. But and to Paulina, I remember growing up in a prairie town called Winnipeg, Manitoba, roughly around 600,000 people. And then I got a job with the government in Ottawa. And it was another town at the time around 650,000 people. So roughly the same, but it was like two different cultures. One was warm and friendly. The other was a lot of people were transient. They were coming in and out of the city. And so I found it a lot colder. I remember I was going to move out to Victoria to do an industrial assignment for 1 year from Ottawa to Victoria. And the day I was leaving Ottawa, my neighbors who saw me moving out, so, oh, you're moving out? This is the first time, in a year we had a conversation. So Ottawa can be, depending on the city and the people, cold. In Victoria, I'm moving in to an apartment building. The guy next door said, "Hey, you're moving in. I'm so and so, coming for a beer." Just it's completely different than my experience in a different city. So, and now that I'm living in Souk, I'm really enjoying life here. I had a group of friends in Ottawa and Karen had family there. We do miss them, but I'm very happy in this town. And that's all I got to say for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Tulip?
I believe to maintain relationships, we need patience and tolerance, and and things are different now. So that's probably one of the main factors, I think, why there's less patience and everyone's in a hurry.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Over to you, Joe. And then Leon after that.
Yeah, picking up on one of the things that Leon touched on about collaboration, and that was one of the things that when thinking about this, I said, they working together. And obviously, you remember very vividly when it's in person. Whether you're digging ditches or doing things physically together, that you do form very specific types of bonds, and you find, and that picks up on one of the things that Denise mentioned and Paulina as well about helping other people, do what it is they're trying to do. So there's kind of collaborating where you are sharing the inputs to a common piece of work. There's also pitching in to help someone do what they need to do, like Leon moving or something like that. Like it's those types of a pooling of effort and contact. And one of my reflections was that, like my friend in Vienna, it was an example where we were actually collaborating digitally. So in some ways, at that level, that particular aspect of relationship was being developed even remotely. Yeah, and I'll pause there.
Thank you, Leon.
My father. So we grew up in a very different time to interacted with. And they told me before that if someone died or if an event happened in the village, or well, someplace far away from the village they were at, you wouldn't find out until like the next day, sometimes even a few days after it occurs. But today, like as soon as something happens, then your phone starts ringing like crazy. Like we know about a war in Ukraine, we know what's happening in Israel and Palestine, we know what's happening in Europe, so on and so forth. But for most of human history, you're not really fed all of that information, all of what's going on all around the world. Then when I was thinking about that, when I started to remove some social media off my life, I started to become more bored. And because I was becoming more bored, I started to actually leave the house more. I started to interact with people more. So it just kind of like brings back to like there's actually a utility in boredom, because even looking back at my own childhood, or even and for a lot of people who can relate, you be with your friend or someone, and then you're just bored, and then like what should we do? You start to go and to figure out, well, we could probably do this. We could go hang out at the bar, we could go play, we can go to the bar, we can hey, let's fix something here, or so on and so forth. But it was just that moment where we're not receiving some sort of stimulation with other people. That's what drove us to seek some form of companionship in one way, shape, or form. And I guess also to build on what Tulip mentioned too was the patience and so on. So it kind of reminds me of what Aristotle spoke about friendship. And I think he was one of the philosophers that spoke highly about that. Plato mentioned that friendship or love is of a higher good. And Aristotle, I really love what he does because Plato's kind of like the high, go as high as possible kind of thing. But Aristotle's like, like we're here on Earth, man. Let's make things practical. And he pretty much touched on friendship in the sense that there typically tends to be three types of friendship. So there's the friendship of utility, pleasure, and virtue. So utility meaning like, people you work with at home, or like a business partner, hence the word utility. You basically have that friendship with them because you benefit from it in one way, shape, or form. And then you have friendships of pleasure, which is pretty much you just with that friend just pretty much have a good time in that way. So, back in Halifax, I had guys that I specifically would only like drink with, and I would have my guys I would play soccer with, and I would have my guys that I would watch sports with, and so on and so forth. But Aristotle actually commented that the highest form of friendship are friendship of virtue. And the reason why he called it the highest form of friendship is because these are the friends that actually motivate you or push you to become a better person in one way, shape, or form. So Aristotle really touched on the idea that to know virtue is to practice it. So Plato often touched on the idea that to be virtuous is to know virtue, but Aristotle emphasized the idea of practicing it. So you can't become magically patient overnight. You have to be able to practice patience. You can't, develop a strong sense of perseverance overnight magically. You had to practice it in one way, shape, or form. So any type of good characteristic, you have to practice it. And what's the best way to practice it is with other people. If you become a parent, you have to learn patience with your child, or if you become a teacher, a relationship with student, you practice patience. And I guess also because of that lack of connection that we can sometimes have in around the world, that's where we can see, maybe as probably Kevin touched in his experiences in the bigger cities, is people are so busy that they don't get to practice certain virtues as much, like openness. So that's probably like one thing I always also like touch on is what's the utility exactly of like relationships, especially in around the world, especially since we're so like, like Vin spoke about, like globalized in that way. Human beings never really migrate to that. Well, we did migrate far, but like I'm someone living here in Victoria, thousands of miles away from my family in Jamaica. That wasn't always the case. Like typically families tend to migrate together in one way, shape, or form. But in today's world, you have people thousands of miles away living apart. So it's kind of interesting in that way. Well, I'd like to know what other avenues that we could also like explore in the sense of like what's another key distinction that we have historically as human beings versus like the Monday sense.
Thank you. Joe, yes. And followed by Denise.
Okay. I love that point, Leon, and phronesis is one of my favorite words. I believe I have it tattooed on me somewhere here. So the evolution of practical wisdom from Aristotle and through the experience of actually doing things. And yeah, so I think that's a key one. And I'm picking up on something that Greg mentioned about relationships and going dial back to earlier in history when we had villages and the relationships were really very, very intense, very set. And there's both a good and a bad side to that. So when, for example, Marshall McLuhan, who was actually a literary historian with his honest day job, um, coined the phrase global village, talking about, the emergent internet, even before we had an internet, really. But the idea, and it had both a positive and a negative side, and that the global village, some of the relationships can be toxic, can be controlling. So some of the roles that people were in, they were really in, they were stuck. And so among the things that have driven so many parts of our life online into the digital ether is that we have then more choice. So there is the downside of impatience and speed, but there's a positive side of choice. And like the two examples that I shared of being able to find people in different parts of the world who I would never have crossed paths with some of the people that I know quite well now if it were not for the fact that we were working in a similar industry and we could collaborate on a standard or on a project. And then suddenly it became a recurrent pattern. And we said, we really work well together. So I, I always come back to every time we consider some of the negative sides. I'm always then saying, well, what are some of the good sides? And then I'm equally eager to look at some of the bad sides. And we see that in some of the online worlds, like the echo chambers, and people basically just putting in their own bubbles and not talking to other people or not accepting other details online. Well, this is the same way the village worked before it was global. So some things will change.
Thank you, Joe. Over to you, Denise.
So I think everyone has pretty much, in some way, shape, or form, touched on the fact that different cultures bring different. Paulina, your story it made me sad. Actually, very sad to hear that. You move in, you go from a place where everyone is your neighbor, everyone, to a place where you're trying to create that, where you move to, and people automatically, I think you really hit the nail on the head with the term fear. Um, you know, so on social media, there's a fellow, and this kind of relates to this a little bit. There's a fellow who bought a house, and his name is Justin something, and I don't remember his last name. Bought a house for 5,000 euro in the Balkans. Okay. And when I say bought a house, it's a real fixer-upper. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this on social media, and he does little snippets of this house being basically completely and utterly refurbished. Now, he's nowhere near done, and when he started out, it was just him. And what happened is the neighboring, like the village that he's close to, everyone has pitched in, and like they're coming after work. They're giving him supplies. They're basically rebuilding his house for him. And they don't want anything. He buys them occasional food, and is obvious, everyone on social media is saying, "Oh, you better be thanking them." But it's just unbelievable how this small community, after working all day themselves, they're bringing their children, and who knows, someone might say, okay, well, maybe they know that he's recording it and that it's some free advertising for the guy who owns the tile company for the roof or whatnot. But the reality is they're doing it. They're doing it because they want to. No one is paying them to do it. They're helping their neighbor. And that sense of selflessness, like when you were talking about, what is the actual connection? And that connection is love, whether it's, friendship, romantic, utility, whatever it might look like. But it's also a sense to me of selflessness and being able to do something, much like Aristotle's talking about virtue, and that is, to me, that kind of stuff is the epitome of why we're even here, right? I go from that example in the Balkans all the way to me going in to Whole Foods in Vancouver, and just I reached for the rosemary. I was making something with rosemary that night, and this fellow also reached for the rosemary. And it was like the last package of it or something, or the last bunch. And I just jokingly said, "Oh, I guess we're both making something with rosemary tonight." Well, it looked like I just asked him if I wanted to, if he wanted to get married and if I could have his baby. I mean, it was just the shock on his face was horrific that I actually spoke. Is very interesting from a psychological and sociological perspective as to how that tends to unfold, in one country versus another or one city versus another. And then something Drake said about AI is very interesting, and I think a few people have talked about AI, including yourself, Vin. And ChatGPT, I mean, I use it for certain purposes, but I could easily see how a generation, much to what Leon was saying about that loss of imagination and only growing up with that technology, how you can get roped into thinking that ChatGPT is your good friend. The way the messaging comes across, if I make a statement to it and then ask a question, it will say, "Wow, Denise, that was amazing that you thought of that. You're absolute," and I'm like, it's totally buttering me up. And it it plays in that sense of, "Oh, well, let me know how things go. I'd be really interested to," and it's a little scary, and, I'll be 55 this year. I don't mind sharing my my age. So I grew up without all that stuff, but it is just a little bit, from people who are craving connection and craving that, that companionship, whatever it looks like. It's very interesting how that could be filling a void for some people. Um, and it's a little bit, it's helpful, I guess, in some regard, if you know, right? If you don't know that you're talking to AI, that's a different story. But it's kind of interesting, but kind of scary at the same time. So anyway, just some thoughts there.
Thank you, Denise. I'd just like to also share that this, in today's day and age with technology, once you built a relationship, technology and everything that's available to us makes it so much easier to sustain that relationship because you can stay in touch, you can know what's going on. And as Leon said, news travels quick. And one of the best advantages that cheaters get caught. If you take a look at just what's happening on social media today, the Coldplay concert and astronomer CEO Andy, I think Byron, has been caught red handed and he's all over the channels. If he had done this, let's say 30 or 40 years ago, no one would ever know that he was there or he had done something. But today you can track, everyone knows where everyone is, and technology just springs out. Thank you. Yes, Paulina.
So there's something that I got triggered into thinking, and it's something Denise just said. The way kids here, you know, people need rewards more in this culture than in my culture when I was growing up. And I think as much as it's fantastic that in school everybody gets a star for everything they do, whether it's good or bad or ugly, like everybody's getting always a recognition. But it's my personal belief. You know what? My daughter, my Asperger's daughter, she's brilliant. Like she's gone to the best schools. I mean, she's always exceeding at everything. But her biggest sadness in life is that I have never congratulated her. And I don't put my arm around her. And we had a discussion the other day, actually. And she was like, my biggest sadness is that all my teachers and everybody is always telling me how amazing I am, but you are not. And this is terrible. You're my mother. So my explanation to her is that the reward is what she sees. If she works for something, she's getting an A. If she's working for a company, she's getting a good salary, she's getting promoted. She doesn't need the world to go clap, 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 hooray for you. And maybe I am wrong, but I believe that there's a generation and it's happening in my country now because it's spread, that because kids need to have a really good self-esteem and this is what they need in life, because there was this movement that everybody has a low self-esteem, so therefore we're going to tell everybody that you're doing great when you, even if you're not. Now that has translated into everybody wants to get something out of everything, even a friendship. So you're going to be online and you're going to have to get so many likes and you're going to have to exceed. And if you're going to help your neighbor, what is it for? What's out there for me? So this sense that the work itself is the reward. We don't need to be clapped at and told and given a little sticker to remind us that we did a great job. While I see there's some advantage into that, I think we are overdoing it. And that plays also into how we are doing things like what Liam was saying about, we just collaborate with people just because there's no advantage. I mean, there's nothing else, but you have to be a good human being and there's nothing good coming to you. Today, everybody is addicted to what is there out for me. So therefore, nobody wants to do it unless they know that there's something coming out. Well, maybe not nobody, but, kids. This is my constant discussion with my kids. You do that because you want to do it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. You have two responses, one from me and one from Drake. I'd like to go first, Drake, with your permission. So I agree with everything you said, Paulina. I can give you an alternate point of view. People with autism suffer from constant disorientation. That's why most of us have no sense of direction because we get lost every few minutes. We hyper focus on one thing and the rest just disappears, right? So possibly, I'm just throwing it out there, possibly your daughter has a similar situation. And as an Asperger's person, I can tell you that it's not about getting acknowledgement from the whole world or being appreciated by others. You have one or two people who really, really matter to you. And since you're a person who's constantly being disoriented, you need affirmations from those people. It doesn't matter if 10,000 people are your fans and praising you. If those one or two people can give you that affirmation regularly, it helps with your overall orientation. So it's not just about a generic need. So when you talk about a neurotypical person, I agree with what you said. But when you're talking about someone with autism, it's a different set of rules altogether. And I would suggest please give your daughter those affirmations because it helps her with her overall orientation. Otherwise, she'll go around looking for it from others. And when she gets it from others who may not mean well, she could be subject to manipulation, subject to other things which you wonder about that she doesn't need, right? But she would need it from the people who are closest to her. Just my input. Thank you. Over to you, Drake.
Okay, Vin, first, I agree with what you were saying there, but I think that applies to everybody in general, that the people closest to them are the ones that their opinion really means much more, and that positive reinforcement coming from there. And I agree with Paulina on the fact that everybody is getting positive reinforcement about everything. It isn't really positive because what it does is it waters down the value of that to somebody who's doing something exceptional, and now everybody else is. So it sort of waters down that value and can make you question yourself whether it's worth it. But the other thing I wanted to say with that is the likes that were mentioned. Pauline mentioned likes online. Um, when you look at something like my photography online where I post things, sometimes I might just get 5 likes on a photo or something like that, and it's like, what did I do wrong, right? And you start self-doubt and that, whereas someone else might have something out there and judging it uh, objectively, it doesn't have the same qualities in that, and you wonder, well, how did they get so many likes what are they doing right? And you can get that societal pressure, and it doesn't have to be my photos. It could be anything. People posting their selfies online, right? And if you happen to be in the right circles that that promote these things, or get liked by the right person who then everybody else follows, it can inflate that, and other people are left behind um, feeling negative about their relationships with everyone online. So it can be really harmful to look at that, and I think it's important that people remember when they're looking at things online, um, that it's not necessarily a true reflection of what people like in that. It's more of a popularity contest, um, and that's something that has probably always been there to some extent, but it's amplified so much by the fact that it's so easy to have um, anything online, and people say things pretty much anonymously now, right? So it can be positive or negative things that are coming up.
Thank you. Yes, Paulina.
So I'm sorry. I want to first of all thank you for your answer, and it's good because it helps me understand my Asperger's daughter. At the same time, I need to clarify something. I always give her a lot of encouragement for things that she wants to do. Anything she wants to do, I'm there with her 100%. And when she gets it, of course, I congratulate her and whatever. But I guess what I didn't, you know, the example that I'm going to bring it all because I think I didn't express it properly. When she got into the challenge program in Victoria, which is a very, very difficult program to get. Some of her friends got a computer and they got a trip and they got something. She got a really big hug. We went out for eat and I thought, I'm so proud of you got in, but I didn't get anything for her. Like, and she's like, why? And I said, well, that's what you wanted. You got it. That's your reward. You're doing great, kiddo. That's it. I'm not going to give you your sticker because the reward itself is what you just got. I don't need to pay you for that. So I feel that this is the extent. And I'm sorry, I probably I was trying to be empathetic, but I forgot to say that. Of course, I encourage her. And in fact, even she's right now she's in third university. She calls me every single day to ask me if something's good, something's bad. So if you call me to at 8 o'clock in the morning from 8 to 10, I'm hanging with my daughter. She can be a little bit long winged like I am. But anyway, that's because she trusts what I say, but I have always stand with her that I'm not going to overdo it. And that's what I was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Who'd like to go next? Yes. Kirstyn.
Part of what you were saying, Paulina, that it just stood out to me too was this piece of kind of the transactional relationship, though, that what is it that I'm getting out of this? And I think that is something that it is more common at this point, especially I think because we are so interconnected. And Joe, I know you touched on the point about choices, and I think sometimes that transactional piece ends up coming in because we have so many choices. So if I'm not getting what I want out of this relationship, well, then swipe and I'll get it out of this one, and so it ends up um, kind of losing that richness, that depth, that part of the patience staying with, and was just thinking about how we can move from more of that transactional relationship to more of the transformational relationship, which I think is what a lot of people have been talking about, which is that the presence, the being willing to stay, work through the things they're challenging. And I think relationships ultimately are our greatest mirrors. And sometimes that ease of access to something different, something new, something immediate can oftentimes be a way for us to avoid that mirror, kind of seeing the parts of ourselves that maybe come up in relationships that can be quite challenging, things we don't want to see in ourselves.
And so that patience that Tulip was talking about, just really being and staying with, I think is just, it's key, and something that in kind of this very interconnected world, very immediate world is not always necessarily something that is what we go to.
Thank you. Yes, Leon, followed by Joe.
Mm, 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 mm. Oh, so one of my favorite, the character posed the question of what is hell, and he said that it is the suffering. Of my favorite lines is it basically speaks about the fact that within the human condition, there's actually an innate desire to love. We always talk about receiving love, but we often, I think, for a lot of individuals, they tend to forget that it's also within our nature to desire to love something or someone in that sense. And we were talking about the potential missed opportunities in the modern world. Like, for example, I look back into my life and I remember moments when I was living in dorm back in university, and when I was going to go cook food, we would share a kitchen. And just going there just to do like a simple action to cook food, I would meet and engage with people, and I would end up in like wonderful conversations with people that from different backgrounds, different cultures, and a different identity, and to get to learn and to connect with them. So that simple action, or even um going out to a nightclub or going to a bar or restaurant, and now those actions are kind of got replaced. So now I found myself since I moved to Victoria ordering like Uber Eats and skip dishes. I'm not leaving my room to go as much to cook food and interact with my roommates, even though I do interact with them, but not as much as normal in that sense. With the technology, I kind of remember that there was also opportunities that I got that wouldn't be possible. Like to this day, I still keep in touch with people I went to school with all these years. Like that my friend actually called me recently, um, saying that he's actually coming to Victoria tonight. We're actually gonna link up sometime this weekend, and that wasn't possible before. Or even when I keep in touch with like my family back in Jamaica or friends in Ontario or like in Halifax. And then I realized that the reason why I do that is because there's an innate desire within me to love someone. And that pretty much that desire is what pretty much drives me to continue to connect. And then, but the thing is that the best friendships I've had or relationships I've had with people were basically the ones where I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. And I wouldn't want to do that. In other words, the best relationships tend to be what we call like the authentic relationships. And I really like the fact that normally authenticity and nakedness are connected, not literally, of course, but in a metaphorical sense where in order to love someone, you kind of have to be naked to them, of course. And there's a connection between love and like the fusion of minds, the psyche. So it's like your naked conscience, yourself is connecting to another person, and it kind of reflects the relationship that you kind of have with yourself. Because in the best relationships that I've had, work wise or friendships and so on, I can be my true self. But in order to become my true self, I had to know what my true self was and to fix the relationship that I had with myself. Cause the cause it wasn't until when the relationship that I had with myself got better, that was when I desired to connect with other people a lot more. And the thing is that when you develop a better relationship with yourself, then you become more of an interesting person, and people love to connect with people who are interesting in that sense. So it kind of just goes hand in hand with that the whole with how a lot of things inward can end up like having like an impact outward.
Thank you, Leon. Over to you, Joe.
Yeah, just feedback. Two things come to mind. One is and it partly in sort of the chats we did just before we started today about how bringing a group of people like this together and different perspectives and just sort of being open to sort of all these different takes on a topic. It almost shows us in some ways how we're all sitting in different rooms, in different cities even, and being able to sort of exchange ideas on a certain level. And I think there's that sort of reminded me. It's just even looking at the screen right now, I'm reminded of uh, when we were in a care facility and I was facilitating calls back to Manotick in Ottawa with all the sort of family friends, and literally it would be a whole screen of people, and it was every bit as chaotic as my kitchen table was when people would come over to visit. Like it was almost as if it was virtual, but it was almost not virtual as well. But uh, in that latter example, we saw that the initial relationships had been built very much in person, like in our little island. We lived on a little island in the Rideau River, and everybody knew everybody, a bit like that global village shrunk down to a tiny microcosm. But there were many things that were really good about it. And many of those people were very active in maintaining the connection with my wife through thick and thin. And the digital technology, being able to get online and catch up was an absolute godsend. So again, this all comes back to um, we touched on a few things about people being themselves, and all of you thing. I think Kirstyn, you mentioned relationships are the best mirrors. It's basically how we really supposed to build ourselves, our consciousness, our self-image, and um, finding the people with whom you can be authentic, as Leon said, is critically important. So I'm now using the technology to collaborate with academics all over the world, and hopefully we will hatch a scheme, a project that will again, continue to build on things in the real world. So it's a dynamic between the two. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joe. Looks like we are running out of speakers. Shall we wrap up for the day? Anyone, any final comments? Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a wonderful, wonderful session, and I can't wait to see what we get into next time.